Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with another range report, or more specifically a range report product review, because this is going to be a dedicated review to an accessory, and more specifically a silencer or suppressor, depending on which term you prefer to use. And the silencer that we will be taking to the range, reviewing and talking about is the Knights Armament 5.56 QDC CRS-PRT. And that's a relatively long name for a very small suppressor, but we get most of the information we need from that name. 5.56 obviously is the caliber. QDC means this uses a quick detach system. CRS stands for the Combat Rifle Suppressor, which according to Knights Armament is a balance between size and suppression, and PRT stands for Pressure Reducing Technology, and that deals with the baffle design. So this is supposed to be a flow-through or low resistance suppressor. Now this is also the first 5.56 suppressor from Knights Armament that I have reviewed. I have reviewed a few of their 30 caliber suppressors, and in general I have been impressed with the exception of one model, but all of the low resistance suppressors have been pretty nice. So I'm hoping this 5.56 one will perform the same. Now there's one caveat that I have for all of my suppressor reviews. I don't have the technology to record decibel reduction. And for the most part, when it comes to other reviewers, this seems to be the only metric people care about. But I argue that most modern suppressors are hearing safe. But us civilians should care about other things like tone, point of impact shift, ballistic changes, heat resiliency, and of course the flow-through technology. Are these cans really reducing that back pressure? And so I like to test these things. Some of them I can test quantitatively, and some of them I have to do qualitatively, essentially meaning I have to share my experiences with you because I can't actually measure the back pressure of the suppressor in any meaningful way. So that's what this review is about. So I want to give you some close-ups of this suppressor, talk about its specs. So let me adjust the camera and let's start with what this suppressor is about and what it can do. So let's start with the specs of this Knights Armament 5.56 QDC CRS-PRT. Obviously, it is in 5.56 or 223. Its overall length is 6.25 inches. It weighs 19.2 ounces, which is pretty heavy for a suppressor of this size. And that is because it is made of stainless steel and 718 Inconel. Knights Armament claims this reduces the sound by 24 decibels, and it's a full-size suppressor, which is kind of surprising because this is relatively small compared to the other 5.56 suppressors I have shot in the past. I do want to show you this end cap here in the front. We can see some of these slots around it, and that is where the gas is supposed to be vented forward instead of back into the firearm. And this is actually the one test I will not be able to do in this review because the host weapon I have for this today is an LMT Mars L, which uses a piston, so we're not really going to get a lot of gas back through the action of the gun. But based off of my experiences with the other Knights Armament suppressors that use this baffle system, it actually works pretty good. And I do want to show you the QD system. So we have some ball bearings in here, which will be ratcheted down, and it will go over a Knights Armament flash hider, and it will index with this little pin on the top. And it simply goes on that quick and that easy, and it is securely mounted onto that firearm. So that's the specs of this suppressor. So now let's go to the range and test out its tone. So as always, I'll start with the gun unsuppressed and then suppressed. We'll see what it sounds like and see if we discover anything else about the suppressor that we should note before moving on. So let's go to the range and see what this suppressor sounds like. And the results of this test honestly are not very surprising, especially for a suppressor of this size. But we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But before we do, there are two people I want to give a huge shout out to. First and foremost is the owner of this suppressor and this rifle, who not only donated his time, but also filled out the paperwork allowing me to borrow them to create this content. He's a local fan and subscriber named D, and he has an amazing collection. So once again, D, thank you for all you do for the Texas Gun Vault community. And as always, I want to thank my primary sponsor who provides the ammunition for these range reports. His name is Mark, and he is the owner of a custom grip company called Brownworks. And you hear me talk about Brownworks in all of my range reports. Mark is an artist. He can create custom grips for guns like 1911s, Browning High Powers, CZ75s, and Beretta 92s, just to name a few. All of his grips are made to order. He can put on custom logos and custom engravings. Anything you can imagine, he can create. So I'm going to put a link to his website in the comment section below, as well as a coupon code for 10% off your first order. And I'm asking you to go over there and see everything he has to offer. And make sure to tell Mark the Texas Gun Vault sent you when you place your first order for a set of custom grips. So now let's talk about this suppressor and why I wasn't surprised. It's a smaller suppressor. And to be very honest with you, it was kind of loud. Now, as I mentioned, I don't have the ability to test its decibel reduction. I do think it's hearing safe, but barely. Now, when it comes to its tone, it's definitely in the higher or mid-range. It's not a low-sounding suppressor, and that might be why it sounds louder to my ears, especially at this indoor range. It doesn't sound anywhere near as nice as the larger 5.56 suppressors that I personally own from companies like Yankee Hill Machine. Now, the next test I normally do is to test the resistance of these suppressors. However, I'm going to forego this test in this review because the host weapon we have is an LMT piston AR. And so all of the gas is pretty much going to be trapped in the gas block and not come back through the ejection port. But I'm going to assume it's going to perform very similar to the other Knights Armament suppressors that I have reviewed that use this baffle technology. So that means the next test we're going to do is to check for the point of impact shift and the change in the ballistics. So I'm going to get out the Garmin Zero chronograph. We're going to get some ballistics data, and we're going to shoot this at a 25-yard range. And I know this gun can go way out further than 25 yards, but if we even get the smallest point of impact shift, you can extrapolate that data out to further distances and know it's going to be much larger. So let's go back to the range and let's see if this suppressor changes anything about the performance of this firearm and the ballistics of these projectiles.
$26.89. $27.42. $26.88. $27.25. $27.31. $27.59. $26.93. $27.55. $27.09. $27.22.
And while I might not have been impressed with this suppressor's tone and sound, when it comes to the point of impact shift and the ballistics, I'm very impressed with it. There's almost no change whatsoever. In fact, I think this is the most consistent suppressor of anyone I have reviewed on my channel so far. So if you want the ability to go between an unsuppressed rifle and a suppressed rifle and not have to re-zero your optic, this might be one to look at. Knight's Armament claims that this suppressor excels at this, and I completely agree. I'm very impressed with those results. They're almost identical. And as I mentioned, I had not seen this from any other suppressor that I have reviewed to this point. So the last test I want to do is test the suppressor's heat resiliency. Why do that, you say? Well, heat typically is the biggest destructor of silencers. It will erode the can from inside. But also, if you're going to use this silencer in the field, you're going to shoot a little bit, maybe you have the rifle on a sling, and you don't want to burn your arm or burn your leg accidentally. You want a suppressor that's not going to get too hot, but hopefully dissipate that heat relatively quickly. Now, this silencer is made of Inconel, and that honestly is my favorite material for any silencer to be made out of because it's very durable. You do get the downside that it is heavier, but it's corrosion resistant. And there's a reason why it's used in the aerospace industry and things like rocket engines. So it makes a great material for suppressors. So what I'm going to do is go back to the range, do a couple of mag dumps through this, see how hot I can get this suppressor. Then I'm going to wait 5 minutes. I'm going to measure it again and see how cool it gets. And by that, we can judge how fast it's dissipating that heat. So let's go back to the range and see how hot we can get this suppressor. And as expected, this being a 5.56 suppressor, it does get pretty hot. But what disappointed me was it seems to retain that heat longer than the other suppressors I have reviewed. Typically, I want a suppressor after about 5 or 6 minutes to be in about the 160 degree temperature range. This is still close to 200 degrees in the upper 100s, and that's still pretty dangerous. Not that it's bad, it did dissipate that heat to below the boiling temperature of water, but after 5 minutes, I want it to be a little bit cooler. So if this is a suppressor that you're going to use in the field, maybe for hunting or go to the range a lot, you just have to be careful with it because you don't want to burn yourself or by accident put it on a range bag and have it melt. And I've done that myself. I've talked about that on the Texas Gun Vault 2, my behind the scenes channel, where I was reviewing a suppressor and I leaned it up against my range bag and I melted it. Yeah, it happens, but that's why I want to test for this, because suppressors are amazing safety devices, but if you're not careful, you can burn yourself and they can be kind of dangerous. But if the suppressor is going to dissipate that heat quickly, it's also going to last a lot longer. But this one seems to retain the heat. I do discover that's typically the case with the flow-through baffle designs. Not always, but most of the time. So what are my final thoughts on the Knight's Armament 5.56 QDC CRS-PRT? Well, this is a pretty darn good suppressor for 5.56, especially if you're going to run it on a CQB style of AR-15. It has an okay tone. It's a little bit on the loud side, but when it comes to its performance with the point of impact and the change in ballistics, it's very consistent, and that really, really impressed me. It does get a little bit hot, and it does stay hot for longer than other suppressors. but this is a military style suppressor, so I really can't say it's too bad. It's just something that I think you need to think about for the civilian application of it. So on my star system, how would I rate the Knights Armament 556 QDC CRS-PRT, the suppressor with a long name that's not that big? Well, I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars. I was a little bit disappointed with its sound and its decibel reduction, but its performance is outstanding. It might not be the suppressor for me because I think I want something that's going to sound a little bit better, but I can't argue with its performance. As I said, if you have a home defense AR, it might be the perfect suppressor for that application. So let me know in the comment section below, what do you think of Knights Armament suppressors? They're really nice, they're very durable, but they're also really expensive. Are they worth the price? Tell me in the comments. And, as always, thanks for watching.